Our next living legend was one of 2 alternates to the first 8 women selected for Navy flight training. A fun fact you may have picked up, she mentioned it in passing earlier, but she told me of the 4 Blue Angels jets above you, she said definitely 3 and almost definitely all 4 of them are in her logbook, so pretty outstanding. She was commissioned in 1973 through the Navy Women Officer School and was the 12th woman to receive her Wings of Gold, doing so in the 2nd class of woman naval aviators. She has over 3,000 hours in the A4 Skyhawk series aircraft and was the 2nd woman assigned to fly tactical jet aircraft following Captain Rosemary Marins. Please welcome the next trailblazer to the stage, Captain Mary Louise Griffin, call sign Sunshine.
Got to get back to my slide 1. We got to go backwards, people. Nope. There we go. There we are. Okay. Hello, Pensacola. Admirals, just side note, I remember the first time I went to speak to the Navy League in Coronado, San Diego, and there was a row of admirals sitting in the front, and I thought the funny story of the lieutenant's funny story to get things going was going to be me telling how in my squadron, VC7, one of the maintenance chiefs had found in a closet an LB-31 camera pod. And they decided to fix it up and stick it on one of the airplanes. No screen. You point the wing where you want to take a picture and pull the trigger. Okay, I can do that. So I went out and took some pictures one day of a submarine off the coast of Southern California. And so I was telling, this was a submarine admiral sitting in front of me, and I told him all about it, and boy, was he mad. He said, "You're not supposed to have pictures of my submarines." I said, "I can't help it if they surfaced out there. I just had the camera." But anyway, thank you, admirals, for being here. Thank you all for being here. I have to speed up a little bit. So I'm going to get on with the her story. This is the slide that kind of busted my surprise. This was an actual quote from a Navy lawyer in 1917. And he was informed that the yeomanettes, well, I'm going to tell you about in a minute, one was going to be sent to his office to be a secretary. And that's what he thought about the whole thing. So we got off to a bit of a rocky start in uniform. But this year, you've already heard about the anniversary. So the ones that I'm kind of focused on here, 75 years, one I don't think you've actually heard so far, permanent military status. I'll get in a little more of that in a minute. The first in aviation and the repeal of combat laws. So in the beginning, there were no women in uniform in the United States. They were camp followers, but they're the ones who fed, clothed, and nursed the fighting men. The 1916 Naval Reserve Act did not specify a gender for the yeoman rating. Now, I don't know what they did specify genders on, but not that one. So in 1917, when we needed some more help for World War I tasking, the Navy hired 12,000 yeomanettes, and those were the first women in uniform. And if you can see them closely enough, they're really kind of cute uniforms. Not today, but. In World War II, women backfilled 350,000 positions. Did you know that over 80 of them were women, waves, officers, air navigation instructors? We had Navy women flying in World War II. Most of them all had pilots' ratings, civilian pilots' ratings. The Navy would not let them be the pilot, but they used them as air navigation instructors. In 1948, President Truman signed what gives us the 75 years of permanent status of women. It's called the Women's Armed Services Integration Act. Before that, women only were temporary. If you enlisted or if you were an officer, it was temporary appointment. When you were done, you were done. You didn't have a veteran status. This act changed all that and made it so that women could be permanent service members. 1967, President Johnson changed one more little piece of that puzzle. There was a limit that women could only be promoted to 06. So President Johnson fixed the flag and general authorization for the women. And as you can see in that picture, he's surrounded by a bunch of women who all were expecting to be an admiral or a general that day, I'm sure. So in the early 1970s, one of the things that I'm pretty sure most of you don't know, if a woman wanted to come into the service prior to the early 70s and had a dependent child, could not do that, not allowed. If you were in the service and you wanted to get married, could not do that, was not allowed. If you got pregnant, not allowed, out, summarily kicked you out the door. So those things changed that normalized life. Can you imagine if we were still under those kind of rules now? We wouldn't be here, most of us wouldn't be here. So the recruiting shortfalls that have been addressed, Captain Osland addressed those a little bit. The reason why there was a problem in the early 70s, social changes of the 60s, y'all are way too young to remember any of that, but it was a mess in this country. And the end of the draft was coming. So one idea, the concept I want you to get here is one idea can change everything for everybody. When Admiral Zumwalt said, let's have some women fly airplanes, I'm sure it wasn't a very popular decision among his leaders, but he did it anyway. That changed the world for every future woman that wanted to be in the armed services and all of the men that served with them. Changed everything for everybody. So this is where I come in. And even though that's a cute little horse my daddy made for me, I really wasn't going to be I'm not very good with a horse, so I wasn't, unlike Joe Allen, who's an equestrian. But airplanes turned out to be my thing. But I had a college degree, and that was my glass ceiling. So this is 1971, and it is my glass ceiling to have a business degree and no job. Not even at my daddy's airline, because there was a nepotism rule, can't do that. Small business hired me to be a Girl Friday. And I wrote out the bills for the farmers that bought equipment from us. But I saw these advertisements. They said, recruiting people, pay attention, recruiting people. I saw recruiting advertisements that said being a junior officer in the Navy was equivalent to middle management experience. Pick me. I got the degree, everybody says I don't have experience, so I need a job, thank you, that's good. So I visited the very nice lieutenant commander in the recruiting office. And he was really very nice. He had paperwork. One of them was a 5x8 card and had about 100 different things on it. Are you interested in? Check, 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 check. So I checked aviation among a few other things. He said, no lie. Do you want to be a pilot? I said, sure, why not? And that's it. That's the end of my great story. I'm here. They picked me as one of the alternates. And there were two alternates. The other one, Commander Chris Giza, sitting here in the back, another classmate of Joellen and I in Women Officers School. So in 73, the 4 officers picked that were from the already commissioned side of the house were getting transfers. And the 4 primary candidates plus Chris and I went to Women Officers School, Newport, Rhode Island, class W7302. And in the front row, I would like to introduce you to our company officer, Captain Linda Ballank-White. And she lives here in Pensacola. So if you're around, you'll go play tennis and you'll find her. So now, the uniforms had a lot of pieces, parts, and we had some funny things. But this is Chris, by the way. That is Chris. That thing on her hat, that's called a havelock. Anybody ever heard of that? Besides Captain Ballantyne and Chris and Joellen, no. It went over your hat like in the snow and the rain. But people told us it made us look like penguins. So also we were marching around the streets, snowy and windy, January and February, Newport, Rhode Island, in skirts and heels. We were told to bring dresses, not pants, stockings, and heels for 3 weeks because our uniforms were custom measured, had to be made, and then returned to us. It took about 3 weeks. So one day, marching down the street, Lita from Louisiana, little bitty thing about that tall, and the snow thing was new to her. She literally got blown away. She was in the short rank in the front, and a gust of wind took her clear to the back. Joellen and the tall rank girls caught her, picked her up, all her holes in her nylons, and held her as we marched off to school. And you've heard a lot about Rosemary Mariner. Her husband, Tommy, told me while we were sitting with her in the hospital toward the end of her life that he wanted me, among others, to speak at her services. And he said, I want you to tell the demerits story. Well, tell me what demerits story? I don't remember. And he goes, the one about where if you hadn't intervened, she would never have been a naval aviator. And I said, oh, that demerit story. So Rosemary didn't play the game. She didn't like the game. She had no use for the game. So she had more demerits than was allowed, and they were about to kick her out of Women Officer School. And I was the battalion commander at the time, and I went to Captain Ballantyne, and then Lieutenant Commander Ballantyne, newly married. She got married in February while we were there. Oh, fabulous guy. Commander Philip White of the Royal Navy. And he came to our commissioning in morning coat, top hat, and cane, and his medals. Our company dad, he was a fabulous guy. Anyway, I went to the boss and I said, ma'am, could I please have one more shot at Rosemary? Can I try to save her? And she thought about it for a little while and she said, okay. I knew this was my first planned, you got yourself into this, now you got to get yourself out of this leadership experience. You do things in school or at home or at church or wherever, and they are little leadership experiences, but this was the first one that I knew this is my new career leadership experience start. I couldn't screw this up, and I didn't. It took a while. It took a lot of verbal bashing to Rosemary, but I got her to admit, I will play the game. I said, if you want to be a naval aviator, you play the game. And she said, okay, I will, and the rest is history. So while we were also there, the skipper of the school was Captain Julia DiLorenzo, who's, she was just amazing. And she said to the OCS guys with all the bridge trainers and all this other stuff that naval officers drive ships. Teach my women to drive. Well, they're here, teach them. So they did. And our YP flotilla went out one day. We had no working uniforms. Remember, those were service dress, blues, heels, etc. And we ended up getting I have a copy of it, official Navy message from the skipper of a destroyer that passed us, commending us for rendering honors properly in our whole YP flotilla. And that was a pretty proud moment. We knew we were going to be naval officers. So now the glass ceiling breakers, other than the aviators that I've already mentioned to you, we had the first woman squadron intelligence officer, Gail Harris. You can Google her. She's a pretty interesting career. She did a lot of firsts. And I've already told you about Captain Ballantyne, but what I didn't tell you is she later became the first Defense and Naval Attaché woman in this country service. And she went to New Zealand. Oh, darn. And you should ask her about those stories. She's got great ones. So now there's Women Officer School is all done. It's over. We were the last. Now it's co-ed. And also that year, we got flight surgeons and chaplains, women. So we're moving along. But now I'm going to move through some of this rather quickly since you've already met some of the women that I have to show you here. But I want to tell you about the rule. Well, there was a first rule, and that was no combat. The second rule was the guys could go to training in helos, props, and jets, but the girls could only go to helos and props. No jets for girls. So here's your lesson. This is your lesson. Take this away. The shortest distance is not always a straight line. So in '74, there were 6 that got their wings, and yes, there would 2 dropped out. Chris and I didn't get to start because the Puzzle Palace decided there needed to be an attrition rate, like the men. But there was going to be a second class, and I'm here proudly to tell you that Class 2, 8 women, all 8 of us got our wings. We didn't need an attrition rate. You've met Barbara Allen, number 1. We lost her way too soon. And Judy, we just lost Judy, excuse me, last December while planning for this whole year of festivities going to El Centro, and we have sadly missed her. But one of the interesting things about Judy was her little Martian. When she was in elementary school, she made her duct tape Martian because she was going to space. Well, she didn't actually get into space, but she retired from her civilian life as the director of space and mission assurance at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. So she did pretty good for herself. And Jane, you've heard about Jane. Well, Jane's 2 daughters, her first daughter has a lot of hours in a C-130, and her second daughter has a lot of hours in a T-34, and she said, I'm not sick, I'm just pregnant, I'm gonna fly. So that was Jane. And Joellen, you've met Joellen. And Anna Marie, she's still alive with us, but lives in France and couldn't be here today. And Rosemary, we've all talked about Rosemary, but now flight school is a little different then. Old school flight school was if you wanted air conditioning, you opened the canopy. No air conditioning. Now I want you to meet Class 2 as I hurry through us. Lynn Vaught Hutton was number 7, and she had retired as the skipper of VRC-40, skipper of Key West, and then went to school and is now the Reverend Dr. Lynn Hutton, Episcopal priest. And there's Chris. I want Chris to tell you about how she ended up in Kandahar. So she's got some pretty interesting stories to tell. And Lynn Spruill was in our class, went off to fly VRC, and we'll see her again. She was the first woman to ever qualify on an aircraft carrier. And Jean McKeag and Pam Hicks were both right there at the end of that class getting wings with. Pam went on to the airlines, and Jean is an attorney for the Veterans Administration in Massachusetts. And then there's me. This, interesting, this picture in the S2 and the fellow in the picture with me, that was my flying partner, and that was our solo cross country. We didn't just get to go have lunch somewhere and come back. We got to take 1976, side number S2, painted up gray and white and blue, to the Tinker Air Force Air Show for static display. Boy, were we somebody. The Air Force just flipped when these 2 people get out of this airplane, and neither one of them are wearing wings. They couldn't get that one. They just didn't understand that. But I got my wings as number 12, and I got a huge surprise. I'm having lunch, and I don't even know if I've passed my check ride yet. I haven't had a debrief. My flying partner's doing his check ride. And the commander from Sinatra staff walks in the club where I'm having a hamburger, and he says, "Are you Lieutenant J.G. Jorgensen?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "You want to go to Miramar and fly jets?" I said, "Let me think about that." "Yes, sir." And once again, just like getting, "Do you want to be a pilot?" Well, there I went. It was because there was this hero, it should be a hero to all of us. Rosemary's skipper at VC2, which had a couple of A4s and a couple of S2s, Commander Lambert said, when they took the S2s away, gave them A4s, everybody's gonna fly, all of them. Yes, Rosemary, they're all gonna fly. And he didn't ask permission, he just did it. And it's the old Puzzle Palace thing. "Oh, you did what?" "It did? Worked out okay?" "Yeah, okay, then send Jorgensen out to VC7. And so they did. And I went to VT-21 for the Jet Transition Unit, and on my board, on the little name, push name card thing, not a video board, I put a prop next to my name, since I'd gotten my wings in S2s. But I made it to Miramar. That's my squadron. There's also a thing that almost happened for me. I almost got to be carrier qualified. My skipper said, all my JOs, and there were several first tour aviators there, and said, they're missing the fleet experience. So he had a buddy who had a buddy who had a buddy or whatever. And there's deck time for us off SoCal. One of the fighter LSOs said, yeah, sure, I'll waive them. And we got to work. And just when we're all signed off, Top Gun needed us. That's what we did. We towed targets. We towed banners. Top Gun needs us, we gotta go. Gun deck, no deck time. But FCLP is signed off in my logbook by the, you're all too young to know, famous Lieutenant Commander Bug Roach, who later died in one of my Squadron A4s off the coast, but he was the cool guy and well-known then. Okay, so back to work. So we're towing targets. Well, two of us are anyway, Rosemary and I. Ships and aircraft shoot at targets. No combat, right? So where's the logic in that? We were the only ones getting shot at. Okay, so this is 1976. We got all through all that to 1976, and now all the commissioning sources are open to women, and we have more. And then I got to the Dinah Shore experience. So in November of 77, Dinah Shore and her co-host, Susan Clark, who was an actress at the time, came to fly with me. And we did all the prep, and Susan was about my age, and we had really fun, and it was laugh, and there's great stories with that. And we took off, XO flying the chase plane with a cameraman. When we came back, the entire flight line was shut down. There were camera trucks, movie trucks, production vehicles, people, cars, all over the flight line. They were everywhere. And all the guys are standing back there going, what's all the fuss over her? So anyway, it didn't always go well. But in 1977, you can take this as sort of a measuring point. There were 14 of us. That's it. But our big lesson was we cannot fear and compete against each other. We have to band together to make this work, so that in the future, women aviators can be competitive. That lesson was like, in addition to the not always a straight line, those are the two biggest takeaways I want you to go from here with, is your history has done for you. At 77, we got Coast Guard, they got on board. And I'll pop through some of the career-minded women and look at the dates of when they were doing things, when they accomplished. Wendy went from being an AOC to an admiral, our first. Then we got naval flight officers in 79. And aircrew, women aircrew. Now the two lieutenants, the plane commander and the co-pilot in that airplane were both my class, class 2. Or I'm sorry, Jean was class 2, Patty Welling was class 3. So by this time, 79, everybody but the Marine Corps had aviators, and the Navy was on ships. The women were on ships. And the book has already been mentioned, but do check into Beverly Weintraub's Wings of Gold book. It's really well done on the history. Okay, so we're moving on. And I'm now at DF 126, which is trying to be an adversary squadron, but it was really an instrument rag. And they didn't want me to fly adversary, so I got to do everything else. I ran the ground school, I did all the check rides, I did all this, that, and the other, but I did get to fly middies. And this particular gal, Cindy Mason, did get her wings later on. Okay, so the rules evolve. Your aircraft retired, your squadron decommissioned, happened to me everywhere I went. So what do? Fleet force changes. You have to go with the change. This was the norm. Well, okay, we'll have 2 more girls in A4s. But the rule then evolved. It was where we were flying something, not what we were flying. So I could you know, A4 to space shuttle. It didn't matter as long as I didn't do it on a combat vessel. So the VQ community stepped up. They don't get on ships, so they were a logical place. The VRC stepped up, and that's where Lynn comes in 1979, first trap, VRC, she's qualified C1. And that was 6 years into this whole process. And in 81, Pat Dinkler took an A4 for the train command to the boat, and then 82, she qualified in the A6 before she came to us in VAQ 33. And now TPS, why not? So by 83, Colleen Nevius goes to test pilot school, and in 86, Beth Hubert went as an A6 pilot. And Rosemary, now we'll get to this part about where the impetus behind the rule changes, the combat rule. It goes back to Rosemary and a lot of other women, but Rosemary has what we call, she said, activate your Rolodexes. This is it, we're going on the hunt. Everybody that knows somebody that knows somebody. And women were marching through the halls of Congress on informational visits. It's not lobbying. And eventually, they got things worked out. But in the meantime, nuance, staff, and detachments not permanently assigned to a ship, okay, now that's all right. Politicians, influence peddlers, arguing with each other, and we're stuck in the middle. We just do whatever anybody will let us do, whenever they'll let us do it. That was basically in the 80s. We're still in that mode. Early 90s. We want a level playing field. As Chappie James was known to have said, excellence is always in demand and no one cares about its color, in this case, gender. That's worth remembering as well. Okay, so we got that part done. 20 years, no more girl rules. And in 93, now the all-combat Marine Force can join us. Okay, we're all covered now. Everybody's covered. So, Captain Lee Hansen, retired here in Pensacola, was the first woman to command, or NFO, to command VT4. And she was telling me a story the other day that walking back from the flight line, the student she was flying with said, well, how many traps do you have? And she said, I have 5. Because when I was a JO, women couldn't be assigned to squadrons on ships. And he goes, oh, that's weird. And she says, yes, it's weird. Isn't that good that he thought it was weird? And here's Wendy in her first airplane. She was our first flag officer in 2005. Admiral Braun, although was a reservist, a skipper of VR 48, flying for Federal Express, took a leave to come back and be commander of U.S. Naval Reserve, the first woman to command a service component in any service in this country. Wendy Lawrence was the first astronaut, and Kay, you're about to hear from, the first NFO astronaut. And Admiral Tyson, Bush Carrier Strike Group and 3rd Fleet, first time those. Lee Campbell, I just mentioned, she was the first wing commander here at Trey Wing 6. And she also gave me another little story. She said, when I went to flight school and I'd walk in the ready room, everyone, it was fall silent, everyone would stare at me. So when I was COVT4, she said I'd walk into the ready room, someone would yell attention on deck, and the room would fall silent, everyone was staring at me. So it's some good change that we've seen. You met Clutch on the TV this morning, and our now selected Admiral Boundsmith. Oh, that's a big deal, commanding an aircraft carrier. I would have never thought about it. Tammy Jo was one of the first women to fly the F-18. Then she got out and went to work for Southwest. You may remember the day that a Southwest airplane had an engine come apart, a window break, and a woman was lost out the window. That was Tammy Jo, the captain, using every ounce of her Navy training to do things perfectly. And she's been well acclaimed for that. So we get together, what Joellen was telling you about, the gatherings for the Hall of Fame for them, which was fun. We had nearly 100 women aviators of all services together in that room. And the little reunion that will never happen. This picture will not be recreated because we've lost Rosemary, but it was those of us from W7302, and we were back together once more. Then, of course, Rosemary's funeral, you've already been told about that, and in case you didn't know, Lieutenant Commander Amanda Lee Blue Angel was one of the young lieutenants in that flight. And you probably haven't seen this unless you've been on the Lexington. There's this big plaque, and it honors women who've served. Features Rosemary in the middle of the picture. And guess what? It's in the ladies' room. So, man, I'm sorry. I guess you can't go look at it. All right, so we got through the Super Bowl. Joe's talked about that. We went to El Centro to celebrate, had a great time. And then, you know, Captain Marvel's got nothing on us. We got CNO, and you heard from her this morning. And in wrap up, the words of one of those yeomanettes from 1917. There's one thing certain, the spirit of the American woman. If you men can't beat the Kaiser, we women will. And thank you.